2020 will forever be known as the year that the world as we know it changed. In the grip of a global pandemic, everything shut down as we collectively entered the unknown. Well, almost everything shut down. World Wrestling Entertainment weren't about to let something like a simple global pandemic slow them down. The show must go on, pal, and WWE somehow managed to present 14 pay-per-views in 2020. And that's because most of them took place behind closed doors in front of no actual fans, so ranking them can be a tricky business. Am I up to the task? Well, they don't call me Adam Up to the Task Pacitti for nothing. I'm Adam Up to the Task Pacitti, and this is every WWE pay-per-view of 2020 ranked from worst to best. Join us. Number 14, Super Showdown. WWE's last foray to Saudi Arabia before the pandemic struck was an absolute shocker full of bad matches and arguably worse booking. The best things on the show, Miz and Morrison beating New Day for the SmackDown Tag Team titles and Mansoor getting one over on Dolph Ziggler, were merely okay, though they seemed a lot better in comparison to the sheer amount of other crap. The opening two-week trophy gauntlet was pointless and basically amounted to a convoluted way to set up an appearance by the eventual winner The Undertaker, who kicked off his feud with AJ Styles. Angel Garza versus Humberto Carrillo was fine, even if nobody really cared. Seth Rollins and Murphy's Raw Tag title defense over the Street Profits was also fine. Bayley's SmackDown Women's title defense over Naomi was also fine. The bad stuff, however, was really bad. Ricochet got eaten alive by Brock Lesnar in 90 seconds in one of the most pointless WWE title matches ever. Roman Reigns and Baron Corbin in a cage was Roman Reigns and Baron Corbin in a cage. It was match number 87 in their never-ending series, only this time, in a cage. And Goldberg's Universal title triumph over The Fiend was pretty much the beginning of the end for Bray Wyatt's alter ego. Number 13, Payback. Essentially a glorified episode of Raw with a newsworthy ending, Payback had no real reason for existing. In the headliner, Roman Reigns returned to the ring to reclaim the Universal title, beating Braun Strowman and The Fiend in a so-so no-holds-barred triple threat match. The head of the table has held the strap ever since. Other title changes at Payback 2020 included Bobby Lashley dominating Apollo Crews to win the United States title, and Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler downing Bayley and Sasha Banks to capture the women's tag titles. Both matches were alright, but the best and most exciting bout of the night was Seth Rollins and Murphy taking on the Mysterios. Big E's win over Sheamus was okay, and Keith Lee beat Randy Orton, which should have been a boost in theory, but was presented as a total fluke, and old Bearcat didn't look impressive in the process. Matt Riddle's win over Corbin wasn't terrible either. In fact, nothing on the show really was. It was all just so boring, and not anything you need to go back and watch or even think about. Number 12, Backlash. I know what you're thinking. How can the show headlined by the greatest wrestling match ever be so far down on the list? Despite hyping up Edge vs. Orton as being the best thing to happen since Melina vs. Alicia Fox, the two men, shock horror, didn't actually have the greatest wrestling match ever. Or maybe they did. Wrestling is subjective, Maybe they did. But they didn't, did they? The match they did have was actually very, very good, if not a little weird, with piped-in chants and a resurrected Howard Finkel doing the ring announcing. They tried though, bless them, and it's a damn solid effort, if not a little long, 45 minutes. The next best thing at Backlash was Drew McIntyre's WWE title defense over Bobby Lashley, a tight hoss fight as you would hope it would be. The rest was all stuff that happened and wasn't remembered come next morning's breakfast. Sasha Banks and Bayley against Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross against the Iconics, whatever. Sheamus against Jeff Hardy, sure. Asuka versus Nia Jax, no thanks, it was no Melina versus Alicia Fox. Braun Strowman versus Miz and Morrison, get that bollocks out of my face and leave me alone. Number 11, WrestleMania 36, Night 2. Yes, I'm splitting WrestleMania in two because it was over 2 nights and that is a lot of matches. What are you going to do about it? Cancel me? Please don't cancel me. WWE tried to make the best out of an unprecedented situation and present their biggest show of the year as the world was falling apart. Hunkering down in the Performance Center and a few other select locations, they managed to get it in the can on time and with as few personnel changes as possible. For night 2, the big match was Drew McIntyre's challenge of Brock Lesnar and the WWE title. It would have been much better in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans, and you feel for Drew getting robbed of his big moments, but they did their business here and ended the 2-night show on a high note. Elsewhere, John Cena and The Fiend had their Firefly Funhouse match that really wasn't so much a match as it was a piece of bizarre yet compelling sports entertainment performance art. Edge had his first proper match back, battering Randy Orton in a polarizing last man standing match that went all over the Performance Center. Again, credit for the creativity and trying to think outside the box in difficult circumstances, but it wasn't for everyone. Charlotte Flair beat Rhea Ripley for the NXT Women's title in a very good match, but the wrong result, obviously. And the rest of the mid-card was fine and paid off some storylines, but all felt very sterile in what was literally a heavily sanitized environment. Number 10, The Horror Show at Extreme Rules. The Horror Show at Extreme Rules. A stupid name for a stupid show for stupid people like me to watch. Honestly, some of the matches were actually pretty fun and engaging, and the wrestlers worked hard, but the intelligence-insulting booking and rotten main event dragged this one right down. First though, the good. The New Day vs Cesaro and Shinsuke Nakamura in a tag team title table match was a solid way to kick off the show. It was followed by another decent outing, with Bayley retaining her SmackDown Women's title against Nikki Cross. MVP then declared himself the new United States champion because title holder Apollo Crews didn't show up as scheduled due to a bulging disc in his back. Yeah, bulging with COVID, am I right, guys? Yeah. Oh, and then Rey Mysterio lost his eye in a match where the only way to win was via eye extraction. Tough night for the master of the 619, losing an eye and all that, but the match itself was sound before the absolutely mental, brain cell depleting finish. Sasha and Asuka then had a good match, which must have been tough since they were likely shell-shocked after watching their colleague lose their eye. The finish to their bout, once again, was rubbish. Drew McIntyre defended the WWE title against Dolph Ziggler. It was a wrestling match between two wrestlers who wrestle very well. I mean, did anyone for a single second believe that Ziggles would win this one? If you answered yes, we need to have a talk about these magic beans I have for sale. And then the swamp fight between Braun Strowman and Bray Wyatt. You know what? Life's too short to get so upset about something that happened so long ago, and so I think we'll just leave this one there and move on to the next show and say balls to you, Bruce Pritchard. Number 9, WrestleMania 36, Night 1. On balance, Night 1 of WrestleMania 36 was just a bit better than Night 2, with a few memorable matches distinguishing it. The show will likely always be remembered for the awesome Boneyard match between The Undertaker and AJ Styles. Not because it looks like it'll be the dead man's last ever match, if you can call it that, but also because it was simply really, really good and unlike anything WWE had done to that point. The positive reception it received did result in the company going a bit mad with so-called cinematic wrestling, but we won't hold that against Taker and AJ, who both, along with Anderson and Gallows and the production team, put the work in and created a fitting swan song for a legendary character. Elsewhere, Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross beat the Kabuki Warriors to win the women's tag titles, Sami Zayn retained the Intercontinental title over Daniel Bryan, John Morrison single-handedly retained the tag titles for him and The Miz in an awesome triple threat ladder match, also featuring Jimmy Uso and Kofi Kingston. Becky Lynch retained the Raw Women's title over Shayna Baszler, and Kevin Owens beat Seth Rollins in a hard-fought street fight. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Elias versus King Corbin, although, on the other hand, maybe I wouldn't be remiss. I guess we'll never know. Oh, and before I forget, Braun Strowman beat Goldberg in a couple of minutes to win the Universal title, a spot originally earmarked for Roman Reigns before he pulled out citing health concerns. Number 8, Elimination Chamber. The last WWE pay-per-view until things went a little bit wobbly for a while, Elimination Chamber 2020 was an uneven effort that had some good stuff and some bad stuff, but mainly was just very long. It started off well with a trio of worthwhile matches. First, Daniel Bryan bested Drew Gulak in a crisp technical affair. It was the bollocks. It was Daniel Bryan's bollocks. Then Andrade beat Humberto Carrillo in a solid match to retain his US title. And then the 6-team Elimination Chamber match for the SmackDown tag titles. All 12 men put the effort in here, and the match had the requisite thrills and spills we've come to expect from the Chamber. Miz and Morrison retained after 30 minutes of engaging action. And then the show got a bit worse. AJ Styles' loss to Aleister Black was drawn out and surprisingly dull. If you like The Undertaker magically showing up and hitting a chokeslam, then maybe you won't mind waiting almost 25 minutes for it to happen. The Street Profits versus Rollins and Murphy was also much longer than it needed to be, and while the wrestling was fine, it should have wrapped up much earlier than it did. The less said about Braun Strowman's 3-on-1 Intercontinental title handicap match loss, the better. And in the main event, Shayna Baszler eliminated all 5 of her opponents to become Becky Lynch's WrestleMania #1 contender. Impressive stuff. The match, not so much. Number 7, Survivor Series. Brand supremacy may be the laziest and most pointless way to try and sell a major show, but the wrestlers did their best to overcome it, and in many cases succeeded at Survivor Series 2020. The opening Raw vs SmackDown men's elimination tag was good enough for government work, even if the one-sided nature of it kinda sucked a bit of the enjoyment out. The Street Profits' victory over the New Day was fun. US champion Bobby Lashley's win over IC champion Sami Zayn was not. The Battle of the Women's Champs was much better, with Sasha Banks edging it against Asuka. Those two always work well together. The Women's Survivor Series elimination tag match was kinda average and a bit long for the Lana punchline. Roman Reigns vs Drew McIntyre was a typically great hoss fight that would have benefited from some proper audience interaction, though the two are so good that you end up not really minding the fact that it's taking place in the Thunderdome. And in the main event, the thing the whole show was built around in advertising, The Undertaker made his entrance while a bunch of his dad friends stood around and watched. Yeah, cheers for 30 years, Mark. Number 6, Clash of Champions. Clash of Champions Gold Rush was a show that was bookended by 2 very good matches and had a whole lot of meh in the middle. In the opener, Sami Zayn retained his IC title in a triple threat ladder match, also featuring AJ Styles and Jeff Hardy. Far from taking it easy in the empty Thunderdome, the 3 men went all out and threw caution to the wind in their bid to entertain. It was plenty innovative, and there was no shortage of big moves and spectacular bumps. And in the main event, Roman Reigns beat cousin Jey Uso in a dramatic epic after beating him to a pulp and forcing Jimmy to throw in the towel on his brother's behalf. Say hello to your new tribal chief, he's so handsome and mean. As far as the stuff in the middle, it was all, well, rather middling. Go figure, eh? Asuka beat Zelina Vega, Lashley beat Cruz, the Street Profits beat Andrade and Garza, Asuka beat Bayley by DQ, and McIntyre beat Orton in a WWE title ambulance match. Number 5, Money in the Bank. Cinematic wrestling had its supporters and detractors, but you have to give a fair play for every company that tried to work around the restrictions the pandemic imposed on them by inventing novel ways to put on matches. The 2020 Money in the Bank matches were prime examples of this creativity, as instead of regular multi-person ladder matches in an empty warehouse, the men and women of WWE would now have to fight their way from the ground floor of Titan Towers to the roof, where the ring with the briefcase suspended above it stood waiting. The men's and women's matches intersected in the frankly balmy main event, which featured such highlights as a food fight, Daniel Bryan and AJ Styles scrapping in Vince McMahon's office, much to the annoyance of the chairman, and Rey Mysterio getting thrown off the side of the building. Man, rough year for Ray, huh? Between this and the whole eye removal thing? Anyway, Asuka and Otis snatched the respective briefcases. Elsewhere, the opening 4-team SmackDown tag title match was canny. Bayley's women's title defense over Tamina was a good effort by Bayley, who attempted to wrestle herself for 10 minutes. Braun Strowman and Bray Wyatt's Universal title match wasn't great as an actual match, but they told a story and, well, sometimes that's enough. Drew McIntyre's WWE title defense against Seth Rollins was a good match, the two stalwarts grafting hard. The Architect was the perfect first opponent for Drew, whose title run got off to a good start, all things considered. Number 4, SummerSlam. Finally, the biggest party of the summer looked like one of my own. 4 hours in an empty building. The move from the PC to the Thunderdome certainly improved things starting at SummerSlam, a show that had mostly very good matches capped off with a rotten main event. In the Falls Count Anywhere show closer, Bray Wyatt mercifully ended Braun Strowman's Universal title reign, which, pandemic or no pandemic, has to be considered one of the worst ever. And then Roman Reigns returned after a 5-month absence and immediately asserted himself as the top dog once again. The top dog, the big dog, the biggest, toppest dog you've ever seen. Clifford ain't got nothing on our man Roman. As for the rest, Asuka got 2 cracks at winning a women's title, first falling to SmackDown's Bayley in a quality opener before tapping out Sasha Banks in an equally good offering. The Street Profits saw off Andrade and Angel Garza in a fun little match. Mandy Rose beat Sonya Deville in a surprisingly good no DQ loser leaves WWE match. Dominic Mysterio debuted and put on a commendable performance in a bruising street fight loss to Seth Rollins. And finally, Drew McIntyre retained the WWE title against Randy Orton in a customarily airtight match courtesy of 2 polished pros. Number 3, Hell in a Cell. The show is called Hell in a Cell. You watch it for the cell matches. You want the cell matches to be good, right? If the cell matches are good, you're usually happy. Luckily, in 2020, all 3 cell matches were superior and more than helped to offset some of the dross. In the first, Roman Reigns continued his revival by beating Jey Uso in a Universal title match that had I Quit rules. The Bloodline collectively knocked it out of the park here, and the post-match cameo from Afa and Sika anointing Roman as head chief was a nice touch. The second cell match of the night pitted Sasha Banks against Bayley in the Boss's successful attempt to win the SmackDown Women's title. It was epic and violent and a fitting end to Bayley's long reign. And in the main event, Drew McIntyre dropped the WWE title to a resurgent Randy Orton after taking a big bump off the side of the cage. Outside of the big bump, the match was very good, if not quite at the level of the 2 other cell matches before it. With regards to the rest, Jeff Hardy vs Elias was filler, as was Bobby Lashley's US title defense against Slapnuts. Slapjack. And Otis predictably lost the Money in the Bank briefcase to The Miz as a shiver shot up my spine when I realised the inevitable. Number 2, Tables, Ladders and Chairs. The last pay-per-view of what had been a very trying year was happily a very good one, with plenty of good to great matches and no real duds. Oh, apart from the match that ended with a man being set on fire, but we'll get there. The show kicked off with a triple threat WWE title TLC match as Drew McIntyre retained against AJ Styles and The Miz. Sasha Banks then beat Carmella in a match that was much better than I'm sure most expected going into it. The Boss retained the SmackDown Women's title, but she was made to work for it. The Hurt Business captured the Raw Tag titles from the New Day in a very fast-paced and well-worked match before the Women's Tag titles also changed hands as Charlotte Flair and Asuka toppled Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler. The match of the night came once again from Roman Reigns as he defended the WWE title against Kevin Owens in a chaotic TLC bout. Both men did what they did best here, and the results were spectacular. I guess the only way to really follow it was to literally set a man on fire, as Randy Orton beat The Fiend in the inherently silly Inferno match, after which he torched the monster. It wasn't a terrible match or anything, but it's hard to look past the silliness. I will not stand for it. I will not sanction it. This is a serious business, and I am a serious man. Number 1, Royal Rumble. Who would have suspected during WWE's first pay-per-view of the year inside a full Houston, Texas stadium what was to come? Royal Rumble wasn't a perfect event by any means, but it had far more good than bad, and once the pandemic set in, demonstrated just how important the fans are when it comes to making sports entertainment what it is. As for the actual Royal Rumbles themselves, both of them were good value. Charlotte Flair won the women's version, last eliminating Shayna Baszler, who had looked mightily impressive before falling at the final hurdle. It was nice to see Mighty Molly and Beth Phoenix in there too. Santina Marella, less so. In the men's version, Drew McIntyre won a match that was expertly laid out and told many great stories. The first half of the match was the Brock Lesnar show as the Beast Incarnate battered and eliminated everyone who came his way as he vowed to win the Rumble from the number 1 spot so that he could, I don't know, take on himself at WrestleMania? Or maybe he just wanted to get that hunting trip in a little earlier this year. Eventually, McIntyre claymored him out to a thunderous ovation in a brilliant star-making moment. That monster ovation was then made to feel like a golf clap when Edge, yes, Edge, made his surprise in-ring return after an absence of almost a decade. One of the best WWE moments ever. Watching the entrance of the Rated R superstar still gives goosebumps. In other show highlights, Daniel Bryan gave the Fiend character its best ever in-ring showing in their Universal title strap match, and Becky Lynch defeated Asuka in a very good Raw Women's title match. Roman Reigns and Baron Corbin's Falls Count Anywhere match was another in their protracted series, and Bayley's SmackDown Women's title defense against Lacey Evans didn't set the world on fire, but everything else delivered. And if you don't want to watch the full show, you could always just watch Edge's return on a loop for 4 hours. I know I did.